The jewelry store was glowing with bright lights. Golden bracelets sparkled under the glass counters, and diamond rings looked like frozen stars. Customers walked in with polished shoes, expensive clothes, and heads held high. It was the kind of place where people whispered in soft voices, as if the jewelry itself demanded respect. Among them stepped in a boy. His clothes were plain, almost too plain for the grand store. His shirt was faded from many washes, his trousers a little loose, and his slippers looked worn out. He held a small paper bag in his hand, the kind you find at any corner shop. His eyes, however, carried something different, curiosity mixed with a quiet confidence. The salespeople noticed him immediately. One of them, standing behind the counter, leaned closer to his colleague and whispered with a smile, "Look at that boy. He doesn't belong here." Another chuckled and said, "Maybe he lost his way. What will he buy here? A candy made of gold." The boy didn't hear their comments, or maybe he just pretended not to. He walked slowly to the first counter, pressing his palms on the glass, staring at the bracelets inside. His face showed wonder, but not greed. He didn't look like someone dreaming of riches. He looked like someone studying each piece carefully, as if the jewelry carried stories only he could understand. One of the salesmen finally approached him. "Yes, boy? This is a jewelry store, not a playground. Do you need something?" His voice carried mockery, though covered in a thin layer of fake politeness. The boy lifted his eyes, calm and steady. "I was just looking," he said in a soft tone. His words were simple, but the way he said them made the salesman pause for a moment. Still, the man smirked and waved him off. "Looking is free, but don't touch anything. These are not for people like you." The customers nearby laughed quietly. A woman with a shiny necklace whispered to her husband, "Why do they even let such people in? It spoils the atmosphere." Her husband smiled, shaking his head as if agreeing. The boy didn't respond. He simply moved to another counter and leaned forward, watching the rings. For a few seconds, silence wrapped around him. His reflection in the glass looked small, fragile compared to the glittering pieces locked inside. Yet, his eyes shone brighter than all the stones put together. The salesman followed him, sighing loudly to make sure everyone noticed his irritation. "Listen, you can't waste our time. Do you know how much these cost? One of these rings is worth more than everything you're wearing." He laughed, and a few others joined in. Still, the boy didn't look upset. He stayed silent for a moment, then asked, "Do you clean these rings every day?" His question surprised the salesman. "What? Why do you care?" "Because," the boy said, "if dust sits on a diamond, even the most beautiful stone can lose its shine." The salesman rolled his eyes. Big words for someone who can't even buy a silver chain. He turned away, clearly done with the conversation. But the boy stayed where he was, quietly studying the designs. Every detail, every curve, every sparkle. He absorbed it all with the focus of someone who knew exactly what he was looking at. Minutes passed, and soon laughter behind him grew louder. Another young customer, dressed in branded clothes, came closer and said, "Hey, do you want me to buy you a ring? Maybe a plastic one from the toy shop? That will suit you better." Everyone around laughed again, and the boy became the center of their amusement. Yet, instead of leaving, he looked at the young man and smiled faintly. It wasn't a smile of shame. It was the smile of someone who carried a secret no one else knew. The room grew awkwardly silent for a second. It was the kind of pause where even the clinking sound of jewelry trays felt louder. The boy turned back to the counter, touched the glass gently with his fingertips, and whispered almost to himself, "One day, these same people will see me differently." No one understood what he meant. To them, he was just a humble boy with nothing in his pockets. But the truth, hidden like a diamond under dust, was something none of them could imagine. And soon the truth would shine. The boy stayed longer than anyone expected. Most thought he would feel embarrassed and leave, but he didn't. Instead, he walked slowly around the store, his eyes carefully moving from one counter to another, like an artist studying a painting. Every time he stopped, the staff grew more restless. One of them whispered again, "Why is he still here? He can't afford even a silver chain. He's wasting everyone's time." Another laughed softly. Maybe he came just to feel rich for a moment. But the boy's face never showed irritation. His silence seemed to bother them even more. There was no anger, no fear, just that same quiet smile. Then something unusual happened. The boy pointed at a necklace inside the glass case. It was a delicate design, small diamonds arranged like petals around a golden flower. "Can I see that one?" he asked. The salesman raised his eyebrows. He looked at the boy from head to toe and almost burst out laughing. "This," he said, tapping the glass. "Do you even know the price? This is worth more than a car. Do you still want me to take it out?" The boy nodded calmly. "Yes, please." The salesman smirked, then opened the case with exaggerated slowness. Everyone nearby leaned closer, curious to see what would happen. He placed the necklace on a black velvet tray and slid it across the counter. The boy didn't grab it like an excited child. Instead, he lifted it gently, holding it up against the light. The way he turned it, the way he looked at the details, it was not the gaze of someone admiring wealth. It was the eye of someone who understood how it was made. He touched the clasp carefully, ran his finger over the setting of the stones, and then whispered, "The placement is neat, but one corner here isn't polished well. If not corrected, the diamond might loosen in a few years." The salesman blinked. "What?" The boy placed the necklace back on the tray with steady hands. "The design is good, but it needs more work. A piece like this should last generations, not just a few years." The customers around him exchanged confused glances. Who was this boy to speak like that? How could someone in worn slippers talk as if he knew more than the experts? The salesman laughed nervously. "Kid, do you think you're a jeweler? These are made by the best craftsmen." The boy looked at him quietly and said, "Even the best sometimes forget small details." For the first time, the laughter in the store grew weaker. The boy's tone wasn't arrogant, it was calm, almost kind. But his words carried weight, and they lingered in the air. Just then, the door of the store opened. A tall man in a neat suit walked in. His presence was enough to silence the room. Everyone recognized him, the manager of the entire store. His steps were confident, his expression serious, and even the salesman straightened immediately. The boy turned and saw him. For a second, his eyes softened. He stood still, as if waiting. The manager's eyes scanned the room, then stopped on the boy. A faint smile appeared on his lips. He walked directly to him, ignoring the customers, ignoring the whispers. "Why are you here alone?" the manager asked gently, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. The boy shrugged slightly. "I just wanted to look around." The manager nodded. His voice carried respect, so much that it surprised everyone. "Next time, tell me. I'll come with you." The salesman froze. Their faces lost color. The boy didn't look like a stranger anymore. He looked connected. Too connected. The manager turned to the salesman who had mocked the boy earlier. "Did you treat him well?" His tone was calm, but there was sharpness hidden in it. The salesman stammered, "Why, yes, sir. Of course." But the boy, still calm, said softly. They laughed. The silence that followed was heavy. Even the ticking clock on the wall felt louder. The customers looked at each other, suddenly realizing they might have made a mistake too. The manager looked around at all of them, his eyes hard now. "Do you know who he is?" Nobody answered. They just stared at the boy in disbelief. The manager's voice broke the silence again. "He's not just anyone. He is the son of the owner of this entire jewelry chain." Gasps filled the room. The very boy they laughed at was the heir. And suddenly, the sparkle of the jewelry didn't seem as blinding as the truth standing before them. The revelation struck the room like thunder. For a moment, nobody moved. The golden bracelets, the diamond rings, the polished counters, everything that seemed to matter seconds ago faded into the background. All eyes were fixed on the boy who had been laughed at just minutes earlier. The salesman who mocked him felt his throat tighten. His earlier confidence turned into fear. His smile vanished. He stepped back, trying to avoid the boy's gaze. The young customer in branded clothes, who had offered to buy him a plastic ring, lowered his head, suddenly wishing he could disappear. The boy, however, stood calmly. No pride, no anger. His face looked the same as before, quiet, thoughtful, almost gentle. He didn't gloat, didn't use the moment for revenge. Instead, he let the silence do the work. The manager broke that silence. His voice carried authority. This store exists because of his father's vision, and one day it will pass into his hands. He turned to the salesman, his eyes sharp. And you think it is acceptable to mock him? To laugh at him? One salesman tried to speak. We didn't know, sir. The manager raised his hand. Not knowing is no excuse for disrespect. Every person who walks through that door deserves kindness. Whether they wear silk or rags, you will treat them the same. Do you understand? The salesman nodded quickly, their faces pale. Customers shifted uncomfortably, some pretending to examine the jewelry again, though their minds were far away. The boy's presence had changed the air completely. The boy finally spoke, his voice soft but firm. It doesn't matter who I am. You should never laugh at someone just because they look simple. Value is not always shown in clothes or shoes. The words sank deep. Even the woman with the shiny necklace, who had whispered earlier about people spoiling the atmosphere, lowered her eyes. She remembered how she had laughed. Now her necklace didn't feel so bright anymore. The boy walked slowly to the same counter where he had been mocked. He leaned on the glass again, looking at the necklace he had examined earlier. The salesman watched nervously, expecting anger. But instead, the boy said quietly, "It's a beautiful design." The craftsman worked hard. Just remember, true beauty is in the details. Then he stepped back and let out a small breath, as if releasing the tension of the moment. The manager looked at him proudly. "You speak like your father," he said, calm but with wisdom. The boy smiled faintly. He wasn't thinking about pride. He wasn't thinking about the fact that the truth had been revealed. His thoughts were somewhere else, about how easily people judge, how quickly laughter can turn into silence. As he turned to leave, the eyes of every person in the store followed him. Some with guilt, some with respect, some with confusion. The boy didn't demand an apology. He didn't ask for recognition. His silence was more powerful than any words of anger. At the door he paused. Without turning around, he asked softly, "When you laughed at me, did you feel bigger?" No one answered. The question hung in the air like a mirror, forcing each person to look at themselves. The boy stepped out into the sunlight. The streets outside were noisy with traffic, the smell of roasted corn drifting from a vendor nearby. Life outside the glittering store was simple, raw, and real. The boy breathed in deeply. Out here, no diamond sparkled, but the warmth of life did. Back inside, the customers slowly started to talk again, but the laughter never returned. The salesman whispered nervously, knowing the owner would soon hear about what had happened. And in their hearts, the guilt remained heavy. One customer finally said what everyone else was thinking. "We judged too quickly." The woman with the necklace sighed. He was right. Value isn't in appearance. Maybe the lesson is ours, not his. The manager nodded silently, his face stern. The store was filled with jewelry worth millions, yet the greatest treasure they had seen that day was not gold or diamonds. It was a humble boy who taught them a lesson they would never forget. But what none of them knew was that this lesson was only the beginning. The boy's story had just started, and the world around him was about to change in ways even he couldn't yet imagine. The boy walked down the busy street, his steps slow, his mind calm. The city was alive outside, rickshaw horns, shopkeepers calling out, children running with school bags. It was such a different world from the silent luxury of the jewelry store. Yet both belonged to him in some way. He carried the weight of both worlds in his heart. Behind him, the manager finished speaking with the salesman, but the whispers in the store didn't die. Every customer who had witnessed the moment felt something shift inside them. What they had seen was not just wealth, it was humility wearing old slippers. And humility was harder to forget than diamonds. Later that evening, the boy reached home. From the outside, it was a large house, hidden behind tall gates. Inside, however, the rooms were not filled with unnecessary gold or pride. The place carried warmth, photographs of family, shelves lined with books, and the scent of food from the kitchen. His father sat in the living room, reading papers spread across a wooden table. He was a man with silver hair, dressed simply, though everyone in the city knew he owned one of the biggest jewelry businesses in the country. The boy entered quietly. His father looked up, and his serious face softened with a smile. "Back already? How was the store?" The boy sat down and remained silent for a moment. Then he said softly, "They laughed at me." The father leaned back in his chair. "Why?" "Because of how I looked. They thought I didn't belong there." The father's smile faded, replaced by thoughtfulness. He removed his glasses, folded the papers, and looked at his son carefully. "And how did you respond?" "I didn't argue. I only spoke the truth. Then the manager told them who I was." The father's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in reflection. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "This is why I wanted you to visit the store. Not to see the jewelry, but to see people. Jewelry shines, but it also blinds. It reveals not only beauty, but also character. Today you saw their character." The boy nodded slowly. "Yes. They judged too quickly." His father placed a hand on his shoulder. "One day, all of this will be yours. But remember, the true weight of this business is not in diamonds or gold. It is in how you treat people. If you forget that, then everything we own becomes worthless." The boy's eyes brightened. He understood. He had felt it already in the store, that wealth without humility is empty. The father sighed and leaned back. "When I was your age, I also walked into places where people laughed at me. I wore torn clothes and carried nothing in my pockets. But those moments shaped me. They taught me how dangerous pride is, and how valuable kindness can be. That is why I built this business not just for profit, but to remind myself and others that respect belongs to everyone." The boy listened carefully, every word sinking into him like a seed waiting to grow. Meanwhile, back at the store, the news had already spread. Staff whispered to one another. Customers who had witnessed the moment told their friends. By night, the story of the humble boy who turned out to be the owner's son traveled like a spark through the city. Some laughed in disbelief. Others felt ashamed for ever mocking people in simple clothes. The very next day, when the store opened, every salesman carried a nervous expression. The memory of the boy's quiet eyes and calm words weighed heavier than any gold chain. But the boy wasn't thinking about punishment. He was thinking about responsibility. The world had seen a glimpse of who he was, but he knew his journey was just beginning. As the night grew deeper, he stood at the balcony of his home, watching the lights of the city flicker like stars. Somewhere, laughter and music rose from the streets, while silence settled in the big house behind him. He whispered to himself, "Wealth is nothing if it doesn't teach us kindness." He didn't know that soon, life would test this belief again, in ways much harder, much heavier, than a few laughs inside a jewelry store. The next morning, the boy returned to the jewelry store with his father. Their arrival sent ripples through the staff. Every salesman straightened, their smiles too wide, their voices too sweet. They greeted the father with respect, but their eyes darted nervously toward the boy. The father noticed. He walked calmly across the polished floor, his shoes echoing in the silence. He stopped in the center of the store and turned to the staff. "I've heard what happened yesterday," he said, his voice steady. "You judged my son because of his clothes. You laughed at him. You forgot what this place stands for." The room went still. No one dared to speak. He continued, "Do you know why this business exists? Not just to sell diamonds and gold. It exists because people trust us. They trust that when they walk in, we will treat them with respect, whether they buy a single silver ring or the rarest diamond necklace. If you lose that respect, you lose everything." The staff lowered their heads. Some shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared to argue. The boy stood beside his father, silent, but his presence was heavy. He wasn't there to humiliate anyone. He wasn't there to show power. He was there as a reminder. One of the salesmen who had laughed the loudest finally stepped forward. His voice trembled. "Sir, I'm sorry. We made a mistake. We let pride blind us." The father studied him for a long moment, then said, "A mistake can be forgiven if it teaches you something. But if you repeat it, then you've learned nothing." The salesman nodded quickly, his face red with shame. The father then turned to his son. "Do you want to say something?" The boy looked around the room. The same people who had mocked him now looked at him with fear and respect. For a brief moment, he remembered how their laughter had stung. But then he remembered his father's words. "The weight of wealth is how you treat people." He spoke softly. "Yesterday, you laughed at me. But I don't want an apology. I just want you to remember one thing. Don't judge anyone by their clothes. The richest heart might be hidden in the simplest shirt, and the poorest soul might be wrapped in silk." His words carried no anger, only truth. They landed in the air, heavier than gold. The customers in the store, who had gathered to watch, nodded silently. A few of them even lowered their eyes, recalling how they too had laughed. The father placed a hand on his son's shoulder, proud. "This is why he will one day lead this business," he said. "Not because he is my son, but because he understands the value of respect." For the rest of the day, the store felt different. The laughter of mockery never returned. Every customer was greeted with genuine warmth, whether they looked rich or poor. The lesson had cut deep, and the boy's words stayed in every corner of the shining hall. That night, when father and son sat together again, the father said, "You handled yourself well. You spoke with humility. That is a greater treasure than any diamond." The boy smiled faintly. "I just said what was true." The father leaned back, his eyes thoughtful. "Remember this, son. Wealth is not measured by what sits in our vaults, but by how we treat the people who walk through our doors. Diamonds may shine today and fade tomorrow, but respect and kindness, they never lose their light." The boy nodded. He knew he would never forget those words. Years later, when he eventually took over the business, customers often spoke about the unusual warmth in his stores. Staff treated everyone equally, whether it was a child with coins or a bride looking for wedding jewelry. The boy, now a man, had carried forward the lesson he learned that day. And whenever someone asked him why his business felt different from others, he always gave the same simple answer. Because respect is more precious than gold, and kindness shines brighter than diamonds. The world remembered him not just as the heir of a jewelry empire, but as the humble boy who once stood in worn slippers and taught an entire room the meaning of true value.